So today we're gonna have story time. Uncle Jimbo, tell me a story. Uh, yes, we'll do a story because today, as I was grabbing a hat out of the closet, I was looking for another hat. This hat fell out, and it reminded me of someone that I used to work for back down in Florida. A certain, let's call him Roy. He was the supervisor of myself and others. And one thing that we enjoyed about Roy is Roy had stories. And whenever we had downtime, maybe all the real work was done, and instead of sweeping the floors and doing things like that are good to do, we would rope Roy into telling us a story. We would say something like, "Roy, tell us about the time that," or "Hey, Roy, so and so has never heard that story about this," and Roy would not skip a chance to tell a story. So, in the spirit of Roy and his stories, we're gonna have story time. So, this story is not about Roy. Um, this story it's not really about me either, but I was there, and so without further ado, let's get into it. So, many years ago, back in Alaska, I was on a patrol boat. So this is early 2000s, probably about 2002. I'm not sure exactly, but had the pleasure of being on a patrol boat for a couple of years, and so I was a non-rate at this time. I'm standing the quartermaster of the watch, so I'm just basically navigating or doing the methodical, boring work of fixing our position, not using a GPS or following along that way. But this is back in the old days, and sometimes we would use Loran C, and sometimes we would use line of sight. But for the most part, we would use radar to navigate and fix our position on a chart somewhere. So I'm out there with paper charts, doing ranges from different points of land, and then triangulating our position. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing, as well as keeping my eyes out of the bridge whenever I can to back up the person who's really driving the boat. So the officer of the deck is our executive officer, who happens to be a woman. She's one of our few woman executive officers probably on a patrol boat at the time. There may not have been very many. I think she was the only one in Alaska at the time of the few patrol boats that are up there. And we are making way inside passage in Alaska, so we've got land on both sides. So, but we're not in a narrows or anything. And there's another vessel coming our way. It's Alaska State Ferry, and as is custom and appropriate, two vessels headed towards each other will negotiate a meeting situation. So we're going to pass each other on one of our sides, right? So unlike a road out there in the open water, you don't have lines in the middle telling each other who has what side of the lane. And though usually people pass port to port, you can't just assume that. So the executive officer, she calls up this ferry on the radio. She hails them on 16, and Alaska State Ferry. This is Coast Guard Cutter Liberty. Switch to channel, whatever. I can't remember what we switched to, but and dutifully, without hesitation, the Alaska State Ferry captain, or whoever's driving it at the time, switches over to that channel and hails us back. Says, "Sir, this is Alaska State Ferry." And the executive officer, she turns to me, red in the face a little bit, frustrated, as anyone might be. And when they're not a sir and they've been called a sir, and she looks at me and she says, "He called me a sir." And so I am just a E3. I'm a non-rate. Just just a lackey that does stuff for other people. And I look at my executive officer without hesitation, and I say, well, ma'am, you called him a fairy first. So anyway, you know, I suppose in some world views turned around is fair play. But anyway, so that concludes our story time with Uncle Jimbo, and in the spirit of story time with Uncle Roy, there we go. You guys have a good day out there, and hopefully you get done what you need to get done.